St. Catherine's Medical Center Emergency Room, 2:17 a.m., Detroit. Dr. Michael Torres slumped against the nurse's station, 4 to 2 hours into a double shift that should have ended at midnight. The ER had been chaos since Friday evening, a multi-car pileup on I-94, 3 gunshot victims from separate incidents, and an endless stream of flu cases that the waiting room could barely contain. Dr. Torres, incoming trauma, called out Nurse Rebecca Walsh, her voice carrying the practiced calm of 20 years in emergency medicine. MVA, single vehicle, driver unrestrained. EMS is 2 minutes out. Michael straightened, muscle memory overriding exhaustion. He grabbed a fresh trauma gown as the automatic doors burst open and paramedics wheeled in a gurney at controlled sprint. Male, approximately 60 years old. The lead paramedic reported rapidly. Found unconscious behind the wheel after hitting a telephone pole. GCS was 7 at scene, now 8. BP 90/60, heart rate 115. Significant head laceration, possible internal injuries. No ID, no insurance cards. Vehicles a 1997 Civic, barely running. Michael moved alongside the gurney as they rushed toward Trauma Bay 3. Pupils. Sluggish but reactive. Left pupil slightly larger than right. They transferred the patient onto the trauma bed with practiced efficiency. Michael's hands were already assessing, checking airway, examining the nasty gash across the man's forehead, palpating for chest injuries. The man was clearly homeless. His clothes were layered, 3 shirts, 2 jackets, all worn and stained. His beard was long and unkempt, his hair matted. The smell hit immediately, unwashed body, old alcohol, street living. His hands were calloused and scarred, fingernails black with embedded dirt. Probable intoxication. Michael asked, though he could smell the alcohol. Possibly. Found an empty bottle of cheap vodka in the passenger seat. Nurse Walsh began cutting away the layers of clothing. As she worked, various items fell from pockets, crumpled dollar bills, a few coins, a bent photograph, and something that made her pause. "Doctor, look at this." She held up a worn military dog tag on a ball chain. Michael glanced at it while examining the patient's abdomen. Veteran. Note that in his chart. Will need to contact VA if he's enrolled. Tags say USMC, Walsh noted, reading the embossed letters. Marines. Dr. Sarah Chen, a second-year resident, entered the bay pulling on gloves. Homeless vet. Looks like it, Michael replied, his attention focused on the patient's injuries. Probable subdural hematoma. We need a CT, CBC, comprehensive metabolic panel, BAC, and tox screen. Let's get 2 large bore 4s started and run a liter of saline wide open. As the team worked, Michael noticed something odd. Despite the obvious neglect in street living, the patient's muscle tone was good. Not gym fit, but the kind of lean strength that came from physical discipline. And beneath the grime, his skin showed evidence of what looked like old burn scars along his left arm, the distinctive pattern of IED injuries Michael had seen on other veterans. Name? Michael asked the paramedic. No ID. We're calling him John Doe for now. The patient's eyes fluttered, consciousness fighting its way through the head trauma and alcohol. His lips moved. Michael leaned closer. Sir, can you hear me? You're in a hospital. You were in a car accident. Can you tell me your name? A mumbled sound, incoherent. Sir, what's your name? The man's eyes opened slightly, unfocused and confused. He tried to speak, but the words were slurred beyond comprehension. Definitely intoxicated, Dr. Chen observed. BAC is probably through the roof. We'll know in a few minutes, Michael replied. For now, let's treat the injuries we can see. That headlock needs suturing after CT. Walsh, get surgical tray ready. As they worked, the O's charge nurse, Patricia Morgan, appeared in the doorway. Patricia was 58, had been at St. Catherine's for 33 years, and ran the emergency department with an iron fist wrapped in bureaucratic efficiency. Dr. Torres, a word. Michael continued his examination. Kind of busy, Patricia. Now, doctor. Her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Michael sighed and stepped outside the trauma bay. Through the window, he could still see his team working on the patient. We need to discuss this patient's status, Patricia said, clipboard in hand. His status is critical head trauma requiring immediate imaging and possible surgical intervention. His insurance status, Dr. Torres. He has no identification, no insurance cards, no way to verify coverage. This is going to be a charity case, and we're already over budget on uncompensated care this month. Michael stared at her. Patricia, the man has a head injury. We're not having this conversation right now. We're having it before you order thousands of dollars in imaging and treatment that the hospital will never be reimbursed for. Did you do the MSE? MSE, Medical Screening Examination. The minimum required to determine if someone had an emergency medical condition requiring treatment. But Patricia's tone suggested she was looking for an excuse to move the patient out as quickly as possible. He has a head injury from an MVA. That's emergent by definition. Is he stable? Patricia. Is he currently stable, Dr. Torres? Because if he's stable, we can transfer him to county. They are better equipped for uninsured cases. Michael felt anger rising but kept his voice level. He's stable for now, but he needs a CT scan to rule out intracranial bleeding. That's not optional. Fine. One CT scan. Then we reassess whether continued care here is appropriate. Patricia made a note on her clipboard. And Dr. Torres, try to move him through quickly. We have paying patients in the waiting room. She walked away before Michael could respond. He stood there for a moment, watching through the window as his team carefully cleaned the patient's wounds. Rebecca Walsh was speaking softly to the unconscious man, explaining what they were doing, a kindness that many healthcare workers forgot when dealing with homeless patients who couldn't hear or respond. Michael returned to the trauma bay. CT is approved. Let's get him down there as soon as he's stable for transport. Dr. Chen had removed most of the patient's outer layers of clothing. As she worked, she uncovered something that made her pause. Dr. Torres, you need to see this. She'd exposed the man's left forearm. Beneath the grime and old burn scars, a tattoo was visible, faded but still legible. The Marine Corps eagle, globe, and anchor. And beneath it, words, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines. Fallujah 2004. Infantry Marines, Dr. Chen said softly. That was one of the bloodiest battles of the Iraq War. Michael examined the tattoo more closely, then the burn scars, then the patient's hands. These weren't the soft hands of someone who'd always been homeless. These were the hands of someone who'd worked hard, trained hard, fought hard. Check his back, Michael said. Dr. Chen carefully rolled the patient. His back showed more scarring, shrapnel wounds, long healed but extensive. This man had been seriously injured in combat. Jesus, Walsh whispered. What happened to him? It was a question with 1,000 possible answers. PTSD, TBI, addiction, failed support systems, the 1,000 invisible wounds that turned warriors into wanderers. Michael thought about the dog tags around the patient's neck, about the tattoo commemorating a battle 20 years ago, about the scars that told a story of service and sacrifice. And then he thought about Patricia's budget concerns and the waiting room full of paying patients. Let's get that CT done, he said quietly. And someone find out if this man is in the VA system. Those dog tags should have a service number. As they prepared to transport the patient to imaging, his eyes opened again. This time, there was more focus, more awareness. He looked directly at Michael and spoke clearly enough to understand. Don't let them ship me out. Please. The words were slurred but unmistakable. This man knew exactly where he was and what was happening. He'd heard the conversation about transfers and budget concerns. "Sir, what's your name?" Michael asked gently. The patient's eyes closed again, consciousness slipping away before he could answer. But in that brief moment of clarity, Michael had seen something that would stay with him, not a drunk homeless man. Not a charity case. Not a budget problem. A person. A veteran. Someone who'd served his country and was now begging not to be discarded by the system he'd once defended. Michael pulled out his phone and made a call he wasn't supposed to make, to his friend Jennifer at the VA medical center across town. "Jen, it's Michael Torres at St. Catherine's. I need a favor. I've got a Marine veteran, no ID, found unconscious after an MVA. Dog tags say USMC, and he's got combat injury scars consistent with Iraq deployment. Can you run the service number from his tags and see if he's in your system? At 2:30 in the morning, Mike." "It's important." Jennifer sighed. "Read me the number." Michael carefully noted the numbers from the dog tags and read them to her. In the background, he could hear her typing. "Give me 5 minutes. I'll call you back." As they wheeled the patient toward CT, Michael noticed something else in the pile of belongings that had been removed from his pockets. A small notebook, water-stained and falling apart, with what looked like writing inside. He picked it up carefully. The pages were covered in neat handwriting, dates, locations, observations. It looked like a journal. Michael opened to a random page and read. Day 847, on the street. Found a dry spot under the bridge. Remembered today that it's Sarah's birthday. She'd be 16 now. Wonder if she even remembers me. Stayed sober today. Small victory. Tomorrow we'll try to do the same. Michael closed the notebook, a lump forming in his throat. This man had a daughter. He was counting his days. He was fighting to stay sober. This wasn't just a homeless drunk. This was someone's father. Someone who was trying. His phone rang. "Jennifer." "Mike, you sitting down? What did you find?" "Your John Doe." "He's not a John Doe. His Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, USMC retired. 22 years of service. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 3 in Iraq. Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters. He was medically retired in 2008 after severe TBI and burns from an IED. Michael felt like he'd been punched. Lieutenant Colonel. Yeah. And Mike, he's enrolled in the VA system. Has been for 16 years. But according to his file, he's been flagged as disengaged from care for the past 8 years. Last known address was a homeless shelter in 2016. Why isn't he getting services? That's complicated. Looks like he had severe PTSD, refused residential treatment, walked away from a rehab program. The system tried to help him, but sometimes people fall through the cracks, especially when they don't want to be helped. Michael looked through the window at the man being positioned for his CT scan. A decorated combat veteran. An officer who'd led Marines in the worst fighting of 2 wars. Now lying unconscious in an ER, being treated like an inconvenience. Thanks, Jen. I owe you one. Mike, take care of him. He's one of ours. Michael hung up and stood in the hallway, holding the journal and thinking about budget concerns and paying patients and a man who'd given everything for his country and gotten lost somewhere along the way home. The CT tech's voice came over his radio. "Dr. Torres, you need to see these scans. Now." The urgency in her voice told Michael everything. This was about to get a lot more complicated. The CT images showed exactly what Michael had feared, an acute subdural hematoma, bleeding between the brain and skull that was creating dangerous pressure. It wasn't massive yet, but it was growing. "He needs neurosurgery," Dr. Chen said, stating the obvious. "Call Dr. Rahman," Michael ordered. Dr. Aisha Rahman was St. Catherine's on-call neurosurgeon, brilliant but notoriously particular about which cases she took. While they waited, Michael returned to the trauma bay where Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, no longer John Doe, lay unconscious. The blood alcohol test had come back 0.24, 3 times the legal limit. The tox screen showed nothing else, just alcohol. Rebecca Walsh had cleaned his face, revealing features that told a different story than his current circumstances suggested. Despite the ravages of street living, this was a man who'd once commanded respect. Strong jaw, intelligent eyes even in unconsciousness, the bearing of someone who'd led others. Michael began documenting everything in the chart, including the information from the VA. As he wrote, Patricia Morgan appeared again. Dr. Torres, I just saw the CT authorization. You're ordering neurosurgical consult. Patient has an acute subdural hematoma. Yes, I'm ordering neurosurgery. Patricia's expression tightened. For the homeless patient with no insurance. For the Marine combat veteran with a head injury, Patricia. His name is Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell. He's in the VA system. VA doesn't cover care at private hospitals unless it's an emergency transfer. This is an emergency. And we're required by EMTALA to provide emergency care regardless of ability to pay. EMTALA requires stabilization, not thousands of dollars in neurosurgery. We could stabilize him and transfer him to the VA hospital. Not with an expanding hematoma. The transfer time alone could kill him. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Aisha Rahman, the neurosurgeon. She was in her 40s, Pakistani-American, with a reputation for excellence and an unfortunate tendency to consider financial implications alongside medical ones. Show me the scans, she said without preamble. Michael pulled them up on the workstation. Dr. Rahman studied them carefully, her expression unreadable. Subdural hematoma, moderate size, some midline shift, she assessed clinically. How did this happen? MVA, single vehicle, patient was unconscious at scene. And the patient is? She looked through the trauma bay window at Mitchell. Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, USMC retired. Combat veteran, homeless, found intoxicated behind the wheel. Dr. Rahman's expression shifted subtly. Homeless and intoxicated. So this is a self-inflicted injury from drunk driving. This is a head injury requiring treatment, Michael corrected. The circumstances don't change the medical necessity. The circumstances absolutely matter, Dr. Torres. This patient made choices that led to this injury. He chose to drink, he chose to drive, and now you're asking me to spend hours in surgery and expose the hospital to hundreds of thousands of dollars in uncompensated care for someone who did this to himself. Michael felt his anger rising but kept his voice level. He's a decorated combat veteran with severe PTSD and TBI. His alcohol abuse is a symptom of untreated mental health issues, not a character flaw. That's very sympathetic, but it doesn't change the reality. This hospital is not a charity ward for people who refuse to help themselves. Dr. Rahman, with respect, this man earned our help. 22 years of military service, including combat deployments. Which he signed up for, Dr. Rahman interrupted. Nobody forced him to join the military. And nobody forced him to start drinking or to stop getting treatment from the VA. At some point, people are responsible for their own choices. Dr. Chen, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Dr. Rahman, the hematoma is expanding. If we don't operate soon. If we don't operate, he'll die. I understand that. But there are consequences to every decision, and we can't save everyone, especially those who won't save themselves. Patricia Morgan, who had been listening from the doorway, added fuel to the fire. Dr. Rahman, I should mention that we're currently over budget on uncompensated care. The CFO has already flagged this month as problematic. Dr. Rahman nodded. How long would it take to transfer him to the VA hospital? About 4 to 5 minutes with transport time, Patricia replied. Too long, Michael interjected. The hematoma is expanding. He won't survive transport. That's speculation, Dr. Torres. You can't know that for certain. No, but as the attending emergency physician, I can tell you that transferring a patient with an expanding intracranial bleed 4 to 5 minutes across the city is medically inadvisable and potentially negligent. The word negligent hung in the air like a threat. Dr. Rahman's eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting I'm being negligent, Dr. Torres? I'm suggesting that refusing to treat a life-threatening condition because of the patient's insurance status violates both medical ethics and federal law. Federal law requires stabilization, not definitive treatment. I can stabilize him medically, manage his ICP with medications, and arrange transfer to an appropriate facility, namely the VA, where his care will actually be covered. He'll die during transport. You don't know that. I know enough. And I know that if you refuse to treat him and he dies, that's on you. The confrontation had reached a breaking point. Dr. Chen and Nurse Walsh exchanged uncomfortable glances. Patricia Morgan had her phone out, presumably texting the hospital administration. Dr. Rahman stepped closer to Michael, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm. Dr. Torres, I understand you're tired. You've been on shift for over 40 hours. But don't mistake your exhaustion for moral authority. I am the neurosurgeon here. I make the decision about surgical intervention, not you. And I'm the emergency attending. I make the decision about stabilization and transfer. And I'm telling you this patient is not stable for transfer. Then, you stabilize him. But I'm not taking him to surgery. Why? Because he's homeless. Because he's an alcoholic. Because he can't pay. Because he's a poor surgical candidate with multiple contraindications, including acute intoxication, poor overall health, and a history of non-compliance with medical care. The surgical risk is extremely high, and the outcome is likely to be poor even with intervention. From a medical standpoint, surgery isn't warranted. It was a perfectly crafted medical justification that would hold up in any chart review. On paper, Dr. Rahman's reasoning was defensible. But Michael knew, and she knew, that a younger, wealthier patient with the exact same CT scan would be in surgery within the hour. You're letting him die because he's inconvenient, Michael said quietly. I'm making a medical decision based on clinical factors. If you disagree, you're welcome to file a complaint with the medical board. Dr. Rahman turned to leave. Wait, Michael said. There's something you should know about this patient. Unless it changes his CT scan or his alcohol level, I'm not interested. He's a lieutenant colonel. He commanded Marines in Fallujah. He has a Silver Star and a Bronze Star with Valor. He didn't just serve, he led. He made decisions that saved lives. And now we're going to let him die because he fell through the cracks afterward. Dr. Rahman paused but didn't turn around. That's very moving, Dr. Torres. But heroism 20 years ago doesn't change medical reality today. This man is dying because of choices he made, not because of anything we did or didn't do. She walked away. Michael stood in the hallway, hands clenched, fighting the urge to throw something. He'd been in emergency medicine for 15 years. He'd seen plenty of patients refused care for financial reasons, seen insurance companies deny coverage, seen the poor and homeless treated as disposable. But this felt different. This was a man who'd given everything for his country and was being abandoned by the society he'd defended. Patricia Morgan approached him. Dr. Torres, Dr. Rahman is within her rights to decline a surgical case based on medical judgment. You need to respect that. Her medical judgment is conveniently aligned with the hospital's financial interests. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation. A man is dying. Then stabilize him and arrange transfer to the VA. That's the appropriate course of action here. Michael looked back through the window at Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell. The monitor showed his vital signs slowly deteriorating, blood pressure dropping, heart rate rising. The hematoma was winning. Nurse Walsh came out of the trauma bay. Dr. Torres, his neurostatus is declining. GCS is down to 6. We need to do something. Michael made a decision that would probably end his career. Get me Dr. William Foster on the phone. His home number. Patricia's eyes widened. The chief of surgery? It's 3 o'clock in the morning. You can't. Watch me. Dr. William Foster answered on the third ring, his voice groggy. This better be important. Dr. Foster, this is Dr. Michael Torres in the ER. I have a patient with an expanding subdural hematoma who needs immediate neurosurgery. Dr. Rahman is refusing the case, and the patient is actively deteriorating. I need you to overrule her decision. A pause. On what grounds? On the grounds that refusing to treat a life-threatening emergency because the patient is homeless and uninsured violates EMTALA and medical ethics. Dr. Rahman cited medical contraindications. She cited contraindications that would be overlooked for any other patient. This is a decorated combat veteran being refused care because of his circumstances, not his medical status. Another pause, longer this time. Michael could hear Foster's wife asking what was wrong in the background. What's the patient's name? Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, USMC retired. Silver Star recipient. Currently dying in my ER because we're more concerned about the budget than about doing our jobs. That's a pretty aggressive way to frame this, Dr. Torres. It's an accurate way to frame it, Dr. Foster. A long sigh. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Keep him alive until I get there. The line went dead. Patricia Morgan stared at Michael. You just went over Dr. Rahman's head. You went over my head. This is going to have consequences. I don't care about consequences. I care about my patient. Your patient is a homeless alcoholic who drove drunk and crashed. Why are you willing to sacrifice your career for someone who clearly doesn't value his own life? Michael met her eyes. Because someone has to. Because when we start deciding who deserves to live based on their current circumstances instead of their inherent worth, we stop being healers and become executioners. He walked back into the trauma bay and looked down at Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell. The man's breathing was becoming irregular, his pupils increasingly unequal. They had maybe an hour, possibly less. Rebecca Walsh stood beside him. Dr. Torres, I've worked in emergency medicine for 20 years. I've seen a lot of patients refused care for a lot of reasons. But this one feels different. Why? Because he's one of ours. We ask people to serve, to fight, to sacrifice. And when they come home broken, we turn away because it's inconvenient or expensive. That's not right. That's never right. Michael put his hand on Mitchell's shoulder. Hang in there, Colonel. Help is coming. Just hang in there. The monitors beeped steadily. The clock ticked forward. And Michael Torres wondered if he'd just saved a man's life or ended his own career. Or possibly both. Dr. William Foster arrived at St. Catherine's at 3:17 a.m., wearing jeans and a rumpled button-down, looking every bit like a man who'd been pulled from bed on 2 hours of sleep. But his eyes were sharp as he reviewed Mitchell's CT scans and chart. Walk me through it, he said to Michael. Michael laid out the case clinically. The accident, the injuries, the imaging, Dr. Rahman's refusal, his own assessment that the patient wouldn't survive transfer. Foster listened without interruption, then turned to Patricia Morgan, who'd been hovering nervously. Where's Dr. Rahman now? She went home, Dr. Foster. Said she'd made her medical assessment and the case didn't warrant her involvement. Call her. Tell her I want her back here now. Sir, it's after 3 a.m. Now, Patricia. While they waited, Foster examined Mitchell directly. He checked the patient's pupils, assessed his neuro responses, reviewed the vitals. Finally, he straightened up. Dr. Torres is correct. This patient needs surgery. The hematoma is expanding, there's increasing midline shift, and his clinical status is deteriorating. These are clear surgical indications. But sir, Patricia interjected, The patient is acutely intoxicated, homeless, no insurance. None of which changes the medical necessity of the intervention. Foster cut her off. EMTALA is crystal clear on this. We provide emergency care regardless of ability to pay. That's federal law, and it supersedes the hospital's budget concerns. Dr. Rahman felt the surgical risk was too high. I'll make that assessment when she gets here. But from what I'm seeing, this is a straightforward evacuation of a subdural hematoma. Yes, there are risks, but the alternative is certain death. That's not a medical judgment. That's an economic one dressed up in medical language. Dr. Chen, who'd been quietly observing, spoke up. Dr. Foster, there's something else you should know. The patient is a decorated combat veteran, lieutenant colonel in the Marines. Multiple combat tours, Silver Star, Bronze Star. I don't care if he's a private or a general, Foster interrupted. Every patient gets the same standard of care. That's the job. But I appreciate you mentioning it because it raises another issue. This hospital receives federal funding and Medicare or Medicaid reimbursement. Discriminating against veterans could put all of that at risk. Patricia's face went pale. She hadn't considered that angle. 20 minutes later, Dr. Rahman returned, clearly furious at being called back. She walked directly to Foster. Dr. Foster, I made my medical assessment. I don't appreciate being second-guessed by an emergency physician who thinks he knows neurosurgery. I'm not second-guessing your assessment, Aisha. I'm overriding it. This patient is going to surgery, and you're going to operate. On what authority? On the authority of being chief of surgery. This is a clear surgical case. You know it, I know it, and Dr. Torres knows it. The only reason we're having this conversation is because the patient can't pay. That's not true. I cited multiple contraindications, all of which are routinely overlooked for insured patients. Don't insult my intelligence. Dr. Rahman's expression hardened. Fine. I'll operate. But I want it on record that I consider this poor medical judgment driven by emotional reasoning rather than clinical evidence. And when this patient has a poor outcome, which he will, I don't want any blowback on me. Noted. Now prep him for surgery. As Dr. Rahman stalked away to prepare, Foster turned to Michael. Dr. Torres, you did the right thing calling me. But you also need to understand that you made some powerful enemies tonight. Dr. Rahman has friends on the board. Patricia runs this ER like her personal kingdom. They are not going to forget this. I know, sir. Was it worth it? For one homeless veteran who might not even survive the surgery. Michael looked through the window at Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell. Yes, sir. It was worth it. Foster studied him for a moment, then nodded. Good answer. Now go get some rest. You've been on for too long. I want to stay until he's out of surgery. That could be hours. I don't care. I started this case. I want to see it through. As the OR team prepared Mitchell for surgery, Michael finally sat down in the break room and allowed himself to feel the exhaustion of 44 hours on shift. Dr. Chen brought him coffee. That was pretty badass, Dr. Torres. That was probably career suicide. Maybe. But sometimes that's what it takes. While they waited, Michael remembered the journal he'd found in Mitchell's belongings. He'd put it in a plastic bag with the patient's other possessions. Now he pulled it out and began reading more carefully. The entries painted a picture of a man fighting a daily battle against demons no one else could see. PTSD flashbacks. Night terrors. The overwhelming guilt of being alive when so many of his Marines hadn't made it home. The slow descent into alcohol as self-medication. The failed attempts at treatment. The burning bridges with family. One entry stopped Michael cold. Day 923. Saw Sarah today. She was getting into a car outside her school. She didn't see me. She's beautiful. Looks like her mother. I wanted to call out to her. But what would I say? Hi, honey. Dad's still a drunk living under a bridge. Better she remembers me from before. Better she thinks I'm dead than knows what I've become. She graduates high school next year. I won't be there. That's probably for the best. Michael closed the journal, his throat tight. This man had a daughter. He'd been watching her from a distance, too ashamed to make contact. How many other veterans were out there, lost and alone, too broken to ask for help? His phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca Walsh, patients in surgery. Dr. Rahman took over from Foster. She's actually operating. Guess even she has limits. Michael leaned back and closed his eyes. He'd done what he could. Now it was in the surgeon's hands. And in whatever grace the universe might extend to a broken warrior who'd given everything for his country and gotten lost on the way home. 4 hours later, Michael jerked awake to Dr. Chen shaking his shoulder. Dr. Torres, the surgery's done. He sat up, disoriented. How long was I out? 3 hours. Come on, Dr. Rahman wants to talk to you. They found Dr. Rahman in the surgical lounge, still in her scrubs, looking exhausted. When she saw Michael, her expression was complicated, no longer angry, but not exactly friendly either. The surgery went well, she said without preamble. We evacuated the hematoma, controlled the bleeding, and closed. He's stable and heading to neuro ICU. He'll need close monitoring for the next 24 to 48 hours, but if there are no complications, his prognosis is actually fairly good. Michael felt relief wash over him. Thank you, Dr. Rahman. She held up a hand. Don't thank me. I did my job, finally. But there's something you should know. She pulled out her phone and showed him an image. When we prepped him for surgery, we found this. It was tattooed on his chest, under all those layers of clothing. The image showed another tattoo, more recent than the Marine Corps one. It was text in a military-style font. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. John 15 verse 13". And beneath it, a list of names. 13 names. Young men's names. Those are his Marines, Dr. Rahman said quietly. The ones who didn't come home. He's carrying them with him. Michael stared at the photo. 13 names tattooed directly over Mitchell's heart. I did some research while he was under anesthesia, Dr. Rahman continued. Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell commanded a rifle company in Fallujah in 2004. Operation Phantom Fury, some of the worst urban combat U.S. forces faced in Iraq. His company took 53% casualties, 13 KIA. He personally carried 3 wounded Marines to safety under fire. That's what the Silver Star was for. She put her phone away. After he came home, he couldn't let it go. Classic survivor's guilt. The VA tried to help him, but he kept refusing long-term treatment. Said he didn't deserve to get better when his Marines couldn't. Eventually, he just disappeared into the streets. Dr. Chen had been listening from the doorway. Jesus. And we almost let him die because he's homeless. Yes, Dr. Rahman said simply. We almost did. She looked at Michael. You were right to push back. I was wrong. Not medically. My clinical assessment was valid. But ethically. I was using medical language to justify an economic decision. And that's not okay. What changed your mind? Michael asked. Honestly, seeing those names. 13 young men who trusted him to lead them, and is still carrying their memory 20 years later. That's not someone who doesn't value life. That's someone drowning in the weight of the lives he couldn't save. She paused. We're all supposed to take an oath. First, do no harm. Tonight, I almost violated that because a patient was inconvenient. That can't happen again. Patricia Morgan appeared in the doorway, looking pale. Dr. Rahman, Dr. Torres, there's someone here to see you. About Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell. Who? She says she's his daughter. And there are news cameras outside. Sarah Mitchell was 26 years old, a first-year law student at Wayne State, and she walked into St. Catherine's ER with the bearing of someone who'd inherited her father's intensity. Behind her came a local news crew from Channel 7, and behind them, a woman Michael recognized from the advocacy group Veterans Justice Project. Patricia Morgan tried to intercept them at the nurses' station. "I'm sorry, but we can't allow cameras in there. Is my father alive?" Sarah's voice cut through the administrative hedging like a blade. Michael stepped forward. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm Dr. Michael Torres. I was your father's attending physician. He's alive. He just came out of emergency brain surgery. The operation was successful and is currently stable in the ICU." Sarah's composure cracked for just a moment, relief flooding her face before the professional mask returned. "I want to see him." "Of course. But first, I need to ask, how did you know he was here?" "My father's dog tags are registered with a Veterans Notification Service. When the paramedics logged his service number, it triggered an alert. I've been looking for him for 8 years." The news reporter, a woman named Jessica Chen, stepped forward with her cameraman. "Dr. Torres, I'm Jessica Chen from Channel 7 News. We've been following Ms. Mitchell's story. Her father, Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, is a decorated combat veteran who's been homeless for nearly a decade. We'd like to ask you some questions about his treatment tonight." Patricia Morgan jumped in quickly. "Our patient's care is protected by HIPAA. We can't discuss specifics." "I'm giving permission," Sarah interrupted. "I want everyone to know what happened here tonight." Michael glanced at Patricia, whose expression screamed lawsuit. But he'd already gone this far. Might as well see it through. "What do you want to know?" he asked Jessica. "Was there any hesitation in providing care to Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell because of his homeless status?" The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Patricia tried to intervene. "Dr. Torres, I strongly advise." "Yes," Michael said simply. There was significant hesitation. The hospital's neurosurgeon initially refused to operate, citing medical contraindications that were, in my professional opinion, actually concerns about insurance status and ability to pay. I had to call the chief of surgery at 3 o'clock in the morning to override that decision. Jessica's eyes widened. This was even better than she'd expected. "So you're saying a decorated combat veteran was nearly refused life-saving surgery because he's homeless?" "I'm saying that Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, who earned a Silver Star for valor in combat, was treated differently than an insured patient with identical injuries would have been treated. Whether that's because he's homeless, because he's uninsured, or because he couldn't advocate for himself, the end result was the same. His life was valued less." Patricia looked like she might faint. This was going to be an PR nightmare. Sarah Mitchell stepped closer to Michael. "Thank you for saving his life. And for telling the truth. I just did my job." "No, you did more than your job. Most people would have let him slip through the cracks. Most people have, for 8 years." The woman from Veterans Justice Project introduced herself as Rachel Stevens. "Dr. Torres, what you've described is unfortunately not uncommon. Veterans experiencing homelessness face significant barriers to health care, even emergency care. Many hospitals view them as financial liabilities rather than patients. That needs to change," Michael said. "These men and women served this country. We owe them better. Can you show us to his room?" Sarah asked. Michael led the group, Sarah, the news crew, Rachel Stevens, and now Dr. Chen and Rebecca Walsh, up to the neuro ICU. Patricia Morgan followed at a distance, already on her phone with the hospital's legal team. In the ICU, Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell lay connected to various monitors, his head bandaged, but alive. Sarah approached the bed slowly, as if afraid he might disappear. "Daddy," she whispered. And then she broke, 8 years of searching, of wondering if he was alive or dead, of anger and grief and hope all collapsing at once. She took his hand and wept. The news camera captured it all. Michael gave them privacy, stepping back into the hallway with Rachel Stevens. "This is going to blow up," Rachel said. "A decorated veteran nearly dies because a hospital won't treat him? That's going to be national news by morning." "Good," Michael replied. "Maybe it'll force some changes. Or maybe it'll just ruin your career. Hospitals don't like doctors who create bad publicity." "I didn't create the bad publicity. I just exposed it." Dr. Foster appeared in the hallway, looking grim. "Dr. Torres, my office. Now." Michael followed him to a small consultation room. Foster closed the door and leaned against it. "You just told a news crew that one of our surgeons refused to treat a patient for financial reasons. On camera. Do you understand what you've done?" "I told the truth. You violated patient confidentiality, you made the hospital look negligent, and you've probably guaranteed we'll be sued. The legal team is having a collective heart attack." "Sir, with respect, I had the patient's daughter's permission to discuss the case. And the hospital should be sued if we're denying care based on insurance status." Foster ran his hand through his hair. "Mike, I admire your principles. I really do. But this is going to have consequences. The board is going to want your head. Then they can have it. But at least Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell is alive." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Foster spoke. "You're right. About all of it. We should have treated him immediately. Dr. Rahman should never have refused the case. And our policies around uninsured patients need to be completely overhauled." He met Michael's eyes. "I'm going to take this to the board. We're going to implement mandatory protocols. Any veteran presenting with emergency conditions gets immediate treatment. Period. No financial clearance required. No insurance verification. Nothing. Treatment first, paperwork later." "What about Dr. Rahman?" "She'll undergo remedial training on EMTALA requirements and medical ethics. She's an excellent surgeon, but tonight she forgot what the job actually is." "And Patricia Morgan?" Foster's expression hardened. "Patricia has been running the ER like it's a business first and a hospital second for too long. There are going to be changes in how we handle uninsured patients across the board." Over the next 48 hours, the story exploded. Channel 7's report went viral. Decorated veteran nearly dies after hospital refuses surgery. National news picked it up. CNN ran a segment. The VA secretary issued a statement. Veterans advocacy groups rallied. But the most powerful moment came when Sarah Mitchell held a press conference at the hospital. "My father is Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell," she told the assembled media. "He commanded Marines in some of the worst fighting of the Iraq War. He saved lives. He earned medals for valor. And when he came home broken by PTSD and traumatic brain injury, our system abandoned him." She held up the journal Michael had given her. "This is his journal from the streets. 8 years of entries where he fights every day to stay sober, where he watches me from a distance because he's too ashamed to make contact, where he carries the guilt of his fallen Marines like a physical weight." Her voice broke, but she pushed through. "My father didn't deserve what happened to him tonight. But he's not unique. There are tens of thousands of veterans living on our streets, battling invisible wounds, falling through the cracks of a system that's supposed to help them. We send them to war, but we don't bring them home." She looked directly into the cameras. "I'm grateful to Dr. Michael Torres for saving my father's life. But I'm also angry that it took one doctor willing to risk his career to make that happen. Healthcare shouldn't be a battle. Veterans shouldn't have to fight for the care they've earned." The press conference ended, but the questions didn't. Within a week, St. Catherine's implemented new policies. Immediate treatment protocols for all veterans regardless of insurance, mandatory EMTALA training for all staff, partnership with the VA for seamless care coordination, creation of a veterans patient advocate position. Within 2 weeks, Michigan's governor announced a statewide review of emergency care access for homeless veterans. Within a month, federal legislators introduced the Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell Act. new protections ensuring veterans receive emergency care without financial screening. And Michael Torres became both celebrated and controversial, a hero to veterans groups, a liability to hospital administrators, and a doctor who'd proven that sometimes doing the right thing means risking everything. 6 months later, Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell walked slowly through the halls of St. Catherine's Medical Center, his gait still slightly unsteady from the brain injury, but improving every day. Beside him, Sarah matched his pace, her hand ready to steady him if needed. They were here for the dedication ceremony. The new wing was called the Veterans Emergency Care Center, a specialized area within the ER designed specifically for veterans experiencing homelessness or crisis. It featured private treatment rooms, connections to VA services, mental health specialists, and most importantly, a guarantee no veteran would ever be denied emergency care for inability to pay. Michael Torres stood near the dedication plaque, wearing his white coat and looking uncomfortable with all the attention. He'd been promoted to Medical Director of Emergency Services, a position he'd initially tried to refuse until Dr. Foster made it clear this wasn't optional. "You broke the system," Foster had told him. "Now you get to fix it." Mitchell approached Michael slowly. The two men hadn't spoken much since that night 6 months ago. Mitchell had been in rehabilitation, both physical and psychological, working through decades of trauma with VA specialists who Sarah had personally ensured stayed engaged. "Dr. Torres," Mitchell said, his voice still slightly slurred from the brain injury but clear enough. "I wanted to thank you properly." "You don't need to thank me, Colonel. I just did my job." "No." Mitchell's tone carried the authority of someone who'd commanded men in combat. "You did more than your job. You fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. When I'd given up fighting." He gestured to the new wing. "This exists because you wouldn't let me be invisible. Because you saw a person, not a problem." Michael didn't know what to say to that. Sarah stepped forward. "Dr. Torres, I graduated law school last month. I'm joining the Veterans Justice Project full-time. My first case is a class action lawsuit against 3 hospitals that systematically denied care to homeless veterans. Your testimony from that night is part of the foundation of our case. I'm glad I could help. It's more than help. It's justice. Real, systemic justice. And it started because one doctor refused to let policy override principle." The ceremony began with speeches from hospital administrators, city officials, and veterans advocates. But the most powerful moment came when Mitchell himself spoke. He stood at the podium, Sarah nearby for support, and addressed the assembled crowd of medical professionals, veterans, and media. 20 years ago, I stood in the streets of Fallujah," he began, his voice carrying despite its damage. "I led Marines, boys, really, most of them teenagers, through some of the worst urban combat American forces had faced since Vietnam. 13 of my Marines didn't come home. 37 were wounded. I was one of the lucky ones. I survived." He paused, gathering himself. "But I didn't really survive. Not the way you think. The physical wounds healed. But the invisible wounds, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, survivor's guilt, those kept bleeding. 4 years. Until I couldn't hold a job. Couldn't maintain relationships. Couldn't look my daughter in the eyes." Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand. "I ended up on the streets because I thought I deserved to be there. Because 13 Marines under my command didn't get to come home. So why should I get to have a normal life? I drank to forget. I isolated myself to punish myself. And eventually, I was convinced I was worthless." His eyes found Michael in the crowd. But Dr. Torres didn't see a worthless drunk. He saw a Marine. He saw a father. He saw a human being who deserved to live. And he fought for me, against his colleagues, against hospital policy, against the system that said I was too expensive, too complicated, too far gone. Mitchell's voice grew stronger. I'm standing here today because one man refused to accept that some lives are worth more than others. One man remembered what healthcare is supposed to be about, healing people, not counting costs. He gestured to the new Veterans Emergency Care Center. This facility exists because my story got told. But how many stories never get told? How many veterans die in ERs or on streets because nobody fights for them? This center is a start. The policy changes are a start. But we need more Dr. Torreses, people who will stand up when it's hard, who will fight when it's costly, who will remember that behind every uninsured patient or homeless veteran is a person with dignity and worth. The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, Michael found himself surrounded by veterans thanking him, advocacy groups asking him to speak at events, and medical students asking how he'd found the courage to go against hospital policy. He felt uncomfortable with all of it. He hadn't set out to be a hero. He'd just been a doctor doing his job the way it should be done. Dr. Foster found him trying to escape to his office. Not so fast. There's someone else who wants to talk to you. Dr. Aisha Rahman approached, looking significantly more humble than she had 6 months ago. Dr. Torres, I owe you an apology. A real one. She glanced around at the ceremony's aftermath. I was wrong that night. Medically, ethically, morally, wrong. I let cost-benefit analysis override medical necessity. I let budget concerns override human dignity. Dr. Rahman, please, let me finish. I've spent the past 6 months reviewing my surgical decisions. Turns out Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell wasn't an isolated case. Over 3 years, I declined 17 surgical cases for patients who were homeless, uninsured, or otherwise unable to pay. 14 of those patients died. 14. Her voice broke slightly. I told myself I was making medical judgments, but I was making economic ones, and people died because of it. Michael didn't know what to say. I've requested a full ethics review of my practice, Dr. Rahman continued. I'm also working with the Veterans Justice Project to identify other cases where care was delayed or denied. And I'm teaching a course at the medical school on the intersection of medical ethics and healthcare economics. Because if I learn these wrong lessons, I guarantee medical students are learning them too. She extended her hand. Thank you for forcing me to see what I'd become. It was painful, but necessary. Michael shook her hand. We all have blind spots, Dr. Rahman. The important thing is what we do when someone points them out. As the day wound down, Michael found Mitchell and Sarah standing in the new Veterans Emergency Care Center, looking at the private treatment rooms and the specialized equipment. This is really something, Mitchell said quietly. 8 years ago, I was lying under a bridge, and now there's a whole wing of a hospital dedicated to making sure veterans don't fall through the cracks. You did this, Dad, Sarah said. Your story did this. No, Dr. Torres did this. I just survived. Michael approached them. Colonel Mitchell, can I ask you something? Of course. What happened? How did you go from commanding Marines to living on the streets? Mitchell was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. When you lead men in combat, you make decisions that determine whether they live or die. You tell yourself you're prepared for that, but you're not. Nobody is. He touched his chest, where the 13 names were tattooed beneath his shirt. I lost Marines. Good kids. Brave kids. And I came home, but they didn't. That wasn't your fault. My brain knows that, but my heart doesn't. The VA tried to help, therapy, medication, residential treatment. But I couldn't accept it. Accepting help meant accepting that I deserved to heal. And I didn't think I did. What changed? Mitchell looked at his daughter. Waking up in this hospital, seeing Sarah for the first time in 8 years. Realizing that my death wouldn't honor my Marines. It would just be one more casualty of a war that never really ended. Sarah wiped her eyes. He's been in treatment for 6 months now. Residential PTSD program at the VA. It's hard. but is doing the work. I'm learning that healing isn't betraying my Marines, Mitchell said. It's honoring them. They'd want me to live, to be a father to Sarah, to use whatever time I have left to help other veterans avoid my mistakes. Speaking of which, Sarah interjected, Dad's going to be the peer counselor for the new Veterans Emergency Care Center. He'll help connect veterans who come through the ER to services, support, treatment, whatever they need. Mitchell nodded. Can't save everyone, but maybe I can help some. Maybe that's enough. As they stood together in the center that had been born from one night of crisis, one doctor's refusal to accept injustice, and one veteran's survival, Michael realized something profound. Systemic change didn't come from one heroic act. It came from sustained commitment. From institutions willing to examine their failures. From professionals willing to admit when they were wrong. From survivors willing to share their stories. From all of it working together. Colonel, Michael said, thank you for your service. All of it, your military service, your survival, your willingness to let your story be told. This center exists because you survived long enough for people to hear it. Mitchell shook his head. This center exists because you refused to let me die quietly. Because you saw value where the system saw cost. That's the real heroism here. 1 year later, the impact rippled outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. St. Catherine's Veterans Emergency Care Center treated 1,247 veterans in its first year. 0 were denied care for inability to pay. 342 were successfully connected to VA services they didn't know they qualified for. 89 entered treatment programs for PTSD, addiction, or other mental health issues. 47 found stable housing. The Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell Act passed Congress with rare bipartisan support. Every emergency room receiving federal funding now had to provide immediate care to veterans regardless of insurance status, with federal reimbursement to cover costs. 12 other hospitals across the country opened similar veterans emergency care centers, using St. Catherine's as a model. Dr. Aisha Rahman's ethics course at the medical school became mandatory for all students. She titled it When Cost-Benefit Analysis Kills, Medical Ethics in Healthcare Economics. Patricia Morgan retired 6 months after the incident. The new ER administrator was Rebecca Walsh, who implemented policies ensuring no patient's care would ever be delayed for financial screening. Sarah Mitchell successfully argued her class action lawsuit, securing an $8.7 million settlement that funded veterans' advocacy programs and mandated policy changes at 3 hospital systems. And Dr. Michael Torres continued working in the ER, treating every patient, housed or homeless, insured or uninsured, veteran or civilian, with the same standard of care. Because that was the job. On the 1-year anniversary of Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's surgery, Michael returned to the new center for a quiet ceremony. Mitchell was there, stronger now, clear-eyed, working his peer counselor shifts and helping guide other veterans toward treatment. They stood together looking at a memorial wall that had been added, listing the names of homeless veterans who'd died on Detroit streets in the past decade. Hundreds of names. Each one a person. Each one someone's father, brother, son. Each one worthy of dignity. We can't save them all, Mitchell said quietly. But we can honor them by saving the ones we can reach. A young veteran came through the doors then, discharged from the Army 3 months ago, sleeping in his car, injured in a hit and run. He looked scared, ashamed, convinced he'd be turned away. Mitchell approached him first. Hey, brother. You're in the right place. Come on, let's get you taken care of. Michael watched them walk toward a treatment room, one veteran helping another, the cycle of service continuing even after the uniform came off. This was what justice looked like. Not perfect, not complete, but better than it had been. Better because people refused to accept that some lives mattered less than others. Better because one doctor had said no when the system demanded he look away. The quiet thunder had struck that night 6 months ago, and the storm of change was still rolling across the landscape, touching lives, reshaping systems, proving that dignity was not negotiable and that every person, regardless of circumstances, deserved to be fought for. The healing wasn't finished, but it had begun. Remember, you earned this care. You don't have to fight alone anymore. Asking for help is not weakness, it's the next mission. We need you here. You are not invisible. You are thunder waiting to be heard.